Hey, welcome back to Leavetherest. I'm Caleb Bridges, and what I wanted to talk about today was what makes something real, and whether it's the way I feel about something that makes it real or not. And I think what made me start thinking about this is that here in the last few months, I've just really noticed how much of my relationship with God is dependent on how I feel day to day. I notice that some days it just seems to be natural and everything comes easy, and I want to pray and I want to be at church and I feel like I'm able to love people well. But then there's a lot of other days where those things don't feel natural and I don't want to pray and I don't want to discipline myself or control myself. And I often find that on the days where I don't want to, I don't. And I think sometimes the lie that I believe is that if I was to act without feeling it, then it would be disingenuous, and so I shouldn't. And I think maybe sometimes other people have this mindset. They think that, well, if I'm trying to pray and my heart's not there, well, I shouldn't pray because it's not authentic. But I think there's a mistake there. And unfortunately, I think it's easy for us to only count as true what is felt. And so we based everything on feelings. You know, we've probably all heard somebody use the expression, it's the thought that counts. And I think what they're trying to say is that, the motive behind what we do is so very important. But it's not the only thing. Because I think sometimes we think that. We think that the action doesn't matter. All that matters is what my heart was feeling towards it. And don't get me wrong, the heart matters a ton. How we feel about something matters absolutely. I think if you want to look at an example of the brokenness of that truth, you look at the Pharisees, whose actions were right, but whose heart wasn't. But I think that sometimes we can take that idea or truth of the fact that we should feel and with our hearts, that we should be genuine and we should desire something. We take that reality, but unfortunately, I think sometimes we take it to an extreme. And by an extreme, what I really mean is that I think sometimes we think we should only act if we feel it. We should only do something if we feel it. And we begin to almost measure the success of something based on how much we felt it. I know I've done this in my own prayer life sometimes. I feel like I've measured how successful I was with my prayers or how successful I was at church at being, participating on how much I felt it. And what I'm not trying to do is beat up on feelings, because that's certainly not it. I think that they're extremely important. But I think the important thing that I want to focus on is what we do when we don't feel, when our emotions are not there. Do we still act? Is it my emotions that make something real or not real? And as I was thinking about this, there were two things that came to my mind that are truths regardless of how I feel about them. And the first one is Holy Communion. I'm an Orthodox Christian, and within Orthodoxy, we believe in the mystery of the real presence of the body and blood of Christ in communion. And this is not something that changes based on how I feel. In other words, if I'm approaching to take communion and my heart isn't in it, maybe I don't even believe it's the real body and blood, and I'm going to take it, well, it's not that somehow makes it not the real body and blood. No, it's real regardless. And that's the reason we have to approach it with fear. And that's also the reason why our preparation prayers for communion say things like, let this not be to my judgment. Let this not be to my, detriment, or let this not burn me. The reason we pray those prayers is because we believe that God is present regardless of how we feel about it. He's there. And so I thought that was a powerful example of how my feelings about something don't change the reality of it. And I think the second thing that kind of struck me was just the act which, if you will, engenders a child. We're talking about sex. Most of the time, the act of sex, which creates a child, is accompanied by a feeling of pleasure, right? But it's not the pleasure that produces the child. It's the act that produces the child, right? Now, the pleasure is just an added bonus. And I think obviously we know this is true because unfortunately there's a lot of women who experience rape who end up pregnant. and there's no pleasure there, but there's still the child. And I think that this reality is very true within our spiritual lives, that many times we are to discipline ourselves. In other words, we're to act. We're to even if I'm not feeling it, I should force myself, to some regards, to pray, to read, to do these, to be in church on Sundays, to participate, to serve other people. I might not always feel it, but it's still producing something. Just like the act of sex can produce a child regardless of how I feel, so too my spiritual disciplines. And so it's a danger to think that we should only do those things when we feel them. Because I think, unfortunately, we live in a society and a culture today which is very based on how we feel. Society says if you're not feeling something, get out, stop doing it, don't do it anymore. You look at our divorce rates. And it's got it written all over it. Whenever you don't feel loving, well, just stop loving the person. Don't try to love them anyway. Just, find somebody else. And I see this in my own life. I can't tell you how many times, I've only been loving when I felt like being loving. I've only forgiven someone when I felt merciful. It's so easy for life to turn into this circumstance or this way of life in which I do only what I feel. And I think the important thing is that we remind ourselves of the fact that there's a lot of things that we may not feel that we should still do. And I think the beautiful promise that God kind of gives us is that when we faithfully do those things that sometimes we don't even feel like doing, He rewards us. He rewards us by not only giving us the feeling, but I think He takes us into something deeper. And I think the examples of this is, the depth of love. I can't help but believe and think that maybe the most true love I can show to someone is when I'm feeling it the least. Because that's when it's the hardest, and it's coming from the deepest part of me, if you will. When I'm making a choice to love someone, even when maybe my heart's not in it, or when I'm, I think the concept of courage is exactly this. We know that courage is not the absence of fear, but the right action despite fear. So despite how I feel, I'm still going to do this thing, and that's what we define courage as. And so I think that it's so true that we value our feelings and emotions. We see them as extremely important, and I think we should even desire that they be present. But we can't make the mistake of making them our sole diet, the sole thing that produces action in my life. Because if I begin to do that, what I'm going to notice is a lot of inconsistency. And that's what I've noticed within myself in the last few months, is just a lot of inconsistencies, a lot of up and downs instead of a constant. And so that's something that I want to improve on. And hopefully maybe this is an encouragement to you to work on the same thing. And I think the best thing that we can all do is that in those moments where we do have our feelings, if you will, and maybe it's an easy day for us, and it's easy to pray and to seek after God, I would encourage you to take those moments to think about what you're going to do in the moments when you don't feel, and it could be as soon as the next day. But kind of setting up in your mind, if you want a promise or a commitment to yourself that, regardless of how I feel, I'm going to do my prayers. Regardless of how I feel this coming Sunday, I'm going to be at church. And so not allowing those emotions or feelings to dictate and control our lives. But to know what's good and to do those things which are good, regardless. So I hope this video has been an encouragement to you. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more videos.